There's a dolphin off the coast of Scotland that researchers have been watching for years. Not because it's rare, not because it's injured, because it plays. Specifically, and this is the part that made marine biologists put down their coffee and stare at each other across the lab. It plays with the animals it kills. Not eats. Plays with. It will catch a porpoise. Release it. Watch it try to swim away. Catch it again. Over and over. The porpoise is terrified. The dolphin appears by every behavioral metric available to be having an absolutely fantastic time. And when the porpoise finally dies from the stress and physical trauma, the dolphin loses interest almost immediately. No meal, no territorial display, no survival benefit of any kind that researchers have been able to document. Just play. Just cruelty, if we're being honest about what we're observing. Now the question that makes this uncomfortable is also the question that makes it fascinating. Is that dolphin broken? Is there something wrong with it, the way there might be something wrong with a human who behaves similarly? Or is it operating perfectly normally within its own biology? Doing something that looks monstrous from the outside but makes complete evolutionary sense from the inside? In other words, can an animal be a psychopath? This is not a cute question. It is not anthropomorphism dressed up in academic language. It cuts straight to the heart of what psychopathy actually is, where it comes from, why it exists at all, and what it tells us about the nature of minds, human and otherwise, that are built without a key component that most of us take completely for granted. Buckle in. This one is going to make you look at the animal kingdom very differently. Before anything else, we need to establish what psychopathy actually means, because the word gets thrown around in popular culture with stunning imprecision. People call their ex psychopathic, their boss psychopathic, their neighbors driving psychopathic, and in doing so, they drain the word of the clinical precision that makes it useful. In the formal psychological framework, psychopathy is a constellation of traits. Reduced or absent empathy, the inability to feel or adequately process the emotional states of others. Shallow emotional range, experiencing emotions in a muted, surface-level way without the depth that most people take for granted. Impulsivity combined with goal-directed behavior, acting on urges without adequate inhibition while simultaneously being capable of calculated strategic planning. Fearlessness, a neurologically reduced threat response that makes dangerous situations feel less aversive than they would to most people. And a characteristic failure to learn from punishment, making the same harmful choices repeatedly because the brain's feedback loop between action and negative consequence is somehow short-circuited. In humans, this profile is associated with the amygdala, the brain's threat and emotion processing hub, functioning differently than it does in the neurotypical population. Brain imaging studies show that when most people view images of others in pain or distress, the amygdala lights up. In individuals who score high on psychopathy measures, that response is significantly dampened or absent. The brain knows other people are suffering. It just doesn't react the way it should. Now here's the critical question. Do non-human animals have amygdalae? Yes. Every mammal does. Do they have the neural architecture for empathy, fear conditioning, and social bonding that forms the neurological substrate where psychopathy, in humans, operates? In many cases, absolutely yes. Which means the neurological machinery where psychopathy lives in humans is present, in some form, across a wide range of animal species. The question is whether it can break, or vary, or develop in ways that parallel what we observe in human psychopathy. And the answer, supported by decades of animal behavior, research, neuroscience, and some genuinely remarkable case studies, is far more nuanced than a simple yes or no. Start with empathy, because it's foundational. If an animal is incapable of empathy entirely, we can't meaningfully talk about psychopathic deficits. The category only makes sense in species where empathy is the expected norm. Here's the thing. Empathy in animals is far more widespread than the scientific community accepted even 30 years ago. Elephants demonstrate coordinated mourning behavior around deceased group members. Not just curiosity, but something that looks disturbingly like grief. They will return to the bones of dead relatives across multiple years, touching them with their trunks, standing in apparent contemplation. Controlled experiments with mice have demonstrated that they respond to the visible pain of other mice with measurable physiological distress. A pain empathy response so robust it actually amplifies their own pain sensitivity. Ravens console each other after conflicts, approaching distressed group members with affiliative contact. Primates, chimpanzees, bonobos, capuchin monkeys, demonstrate active helping behavior, going out of their way to assist individuals in need, sometimes at personal cost. Empathy, in other words, is not uniquely human. It is a feature of social mammalian life installed by evolution because it is adaptive. It helps groups coordinate, helps parents bond with offspring, helps allies support each other, helps the whole elaborate social machinery of animal group living run smoothly. Which means, by definition, that an animal which lacks appropriate empathy responses within a social species is exhibiting a deviation from the norm, a gap where a standard feature should be present. And that gap, that's where things get interesting. Researchers studying chimpanzee behavior in both wild and captive settings have documented individuals who exhibit patterns of behavior that would raise significant red flags if observed in a human child. Persistent, targeted aggression toward weaker individuals without the provocation or status competition context that usually motivates chimp violence. Absence of the reconciliation behavior that normally follows aggressive interactions among chimps who have to continue living together. Manipulation of other group members in ways that appear calculated and cold rather than impulsive. One particularly documented case involved a male chimpanzee in a captive research setting who engaged in systematic, long-term manipulation of social alliances. Not to rise in dominance rank, which would be normal chimp political behavior, but apparently for no discernible social gain. He would cultivate apparent friendships and then exploit them in ways that had no strategic payoff, as if the exploitation itself was the point. Researchers who worked with him for years described a persistent sense of interacting with an animal that was somehow not responding to social feedback the way chimpanzees normally do. That did not appear to care about the relational consequences of its behavior in the way other chimps clearly did. This is not anthropomorphic projection. These are behavioral observations made by experienced primatologists who are trained specifically to avoid exactly that kind of error. The pattern they described maps onto the psychopathic profile with uncomfortable precision. Now let's talk about the animal that almost everyone overlooks in this conversation because it seems too small, too simple, too remote from human complexity to be relevant. The chimpanzee. The octopus. No, actually, stay with me here. The rat. Rat empathy research has been some of the most controlled, most rigorous, and most paradigm-shifting work in the neuroscience of social emotion. In a now famous experimental paradigm, free rats were placed in environments where another rat was trapped in a small restraining tube. The free rat would consistently work to open the tube and release the trapped rat, even when the trapped rat was a stranger, even when no reward was available for doing so, even when the free rat had to choose between releasing the trapped rat and accessing a container of chocolate chips, which rats love with an enthusiasm that is, frankly, relatable. The free rats chose to help more often than not. The empathic pull of another rat in distress was compelling enough to compete with chocolate. Now here's the dark part. Some free rats didn't help. Some showed no reliable pattern of attempted rescue. No apparent distress response to the trapped rat's visible discomfort. No preference between the chocolate and the suffering companion. In rat terms, these individuals were outliers, operating outside the normal range of social empathy for their species. What was different about them neurologically? Studies examining rat brain profiles in relation to social behavior have found measurable variations in amygdala reactivity, in oxytocin receptor density in social brain regions, in dopamine system responsiveness to social stimuli. The biological basis for individual variation in empathic responding is real, documented, and maps onto the same neurological systems implicated in human psychopathy. The rats that didn't help weren't broken in some gross mechanical sense. They were variants, individuals whose social neurology fell at the low end of a natural distribution curve. And that low end, in both rats and humans, produces behavioral patterns that look, from the outside, remarkably consistent. Let's escalate the conversation to a creature that the internet has developed a completely unwarranted fondness for, and that richly deserves. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. A more complicated reputation. The orca. Orcas are cognitively extraordinary animals. Large, complex brains with a highly developed insula, a brain region associated with emotional processing and social awareness. Intricate, learned cultural traditions that vary between pods and are passed down across generations. Multi-layered hunting strategies that require theory of mind. The ability to model what other animals are perceiving and predicting. Long-term social bonds. Demonstrated mourning behavior. By any measure of animal cognition, orcas are operating at a level of psychological complexity that demands serious attention. They are also, on occasion, deeply unsettling. Orcas engage in behaviors that have no nutritional justification and no obvious survival function. Tossing prey animals, seals, rays, porpoises, into the air repeatedly before killing them. Playing with live prey for extended periods in ways that are clearly not efficient hunting practice and appear to cause significant suffering to the prey animal. Teaching their young to do the same, in what appears to be deliberate educational behavior. Not food acquisition training, since the prey often dies without being eaten, but something more like play skill training, where the skill being developed is the ability to extend and manipulate a prey animal's distress. The cruelty pedagogy angle of this is, if you sit with it for a moment, quite something. Now, the standard counter-argument is that we shouldn't apply human moral frameworks to animal behavior, and that objection has real merit. Orcas don't have human moral consciousness. They are not choosing cruelty in the same deliberate ethical sense that a human choosing cruelty is making a choice. But the neuroscience point stands independent of the moral framing. Orcas have the neural architecture for empathy and social emotion, and they are demonstrably capable of suppressing or bypassing that architecture when the target is prey. The capacity for something that functions like empathy exists. In certain contexts, with certain targets, it is switched off. That's selective empathy suppression. Empathy for in-group members, empathy bypass for out-group targets, is, interestingly, also a feature of human psychopathy research. High psychopathy scoring individuals don't necessarily lack empathy uniformly across all situations. Some show selective empathy, capable of understanding and even responding to emotional states in specific contexts while remaining unresponsive in others. The switch exists, but its operation is different from the neurotypical pattern. Orcas may be doing something structurally similar, which is fascinating and also a little bit terrifying when you remember that orcas are the apex predators of every ocean on Earth. Let's revisit the dolphin from the opening of this script, because dolphins deserve a far less cheerful reputation than popular culture has assigned them. Dolphins are among the most cognitively advanced non-human animals on the planet. Mirror self-recognition, one of the standard benchmarks for self-awareness. Documented. Complex communication systems with individually distinct signature whistles functioning as names. Social structures requiring sophisticated relationship tracking across large group sizes. Clear evidence of cultural transmission of learned behaviors. They are also documented perpetrators of gang violence, infant killing, and extended torture of prey animals, including the kind of porpoise-tossing behavior described at the outset. Male bottlenose dolphins form coalitions, sometimes coalitions of coalitions, multi-level alliance structures of extraordinary social complexity that herd female dolphins and prevent them from escaping. This behavior, documented extensively in Shark Bay in Australia, is coercive in a way that has no comfortable framing. It is strategic, it is organized, it involves multiple individuals coordinating to override the choices of another individual through sustained force. The dolphins doing this are not rogue individuals. They are not outliers. This is a documented, widespread social strategy in the population, which means the question of individual psychopathic deviation becomes complicated by the question of whether an entire social strategy can be psychopathic. Whether a population can normalize behaviors that would mark an individual as disordered in a species where those behaviors were exceptional. This is where the human parallel becomes most challenging. Because one of the most consistent findings in human psychopathy research is that psychopathic traits are context-sensitive in their adaptiveness. In environments where the costs of defection are low and the rewards of exploitative behavior are high, psychopathic traits, fearlessness, reduced empathy, willingness to manipulate, can be highly adaptive. They are not uniformly pathological. They are conditionally advantageous, which is part of why they persist in the human population at the frequency they do. The same logic applies in the animal kingdom. The orca who teaches its young to play with prey is not maladapted. It is a supremely successful predator passing on skills that work. The dolphin coalition engaging in coercive behavior is not broken. It is navigating its social environment with strategies that produce reproductive success. The behavior looks, through a human moral lens, deeply disturbing. Through an evolutionary lens, it is performing exactly as designed. Here is where the conversation takes the turn that most popular treatments of this subject avoid, because it is uncomfortable in a way that hits closer to home than talking about dolphins. The neurological variation underlying psychopathy, reduced amygdala reactivity, altered reward processing, diminished fear conditioning, is heritable. In humans, twin studies and family studies consistently show a significant genetic component to psychopathic traits. This variation did not arise by accident and did not persist by accident. It is maintained in the human population at roughly 1 to 2% clinical prevalence because, under certain conditions, it confers advantages. Fearlessness in battle, ability to make cold-blooded decisions under pressure without being paralyzed by empathic concern, willingness to take social risks that others find aversive. The same traits that produce monsters in one context produce extraordinarily effective leaders, warriors, surgeons, and CEOs in another. The animal kingdom reflects this precisely. The variation in empathic responding observed across individuals in rat studies, chimp behavioral research, and population-level studies of social mammals is not noise. It is signal. It is natural selection maintaining a spread of social emotional profiles within a population because different profiles outperform each other under different conditions. A low-empathy rat in a resource-abundant environment is a successful rat who doesn't waste energy on conspecific welfare. In a resource-scarce environment requiring cooperative survival, that same rat may be outcompeted by higher empathy individuals whose social investments pay off in alliance support. The population keeps both types because the environment keeps changing. This is, at the population genetics level, exactly what evolutionary theorists call a frequency-dependent strategy. The optimal strategy depends on what everyone else in the population is doing. Low-empathy exploitative strategies work best when they are rare, when most of the population is cooperative and therefore exploitable. When exploiters become too common, the cooperative majority starts outcompeting them through selective partner choice and coalition formation. The frequencies oscillate around a dynamic equilibrium. Both types persist. Neither eliminates the other. This is not a human story or an animal story. It is a fundamental mathematical feature of social evolution that appears wherever social animals exist in sufficient complexity. Which means psychopathy, or something functionally equivalent to it, is not a malfunction, not a deviation, not a bug. It is a feature. A predictable, mathematically inevitable feature of any social species with heritable variation in empathy and social cognition. So, do psychopath animals exist? The question, by now, should be yielding a more refined answer than the simple yes or no it seems to demand at the surface. Animals with reduced empathic responding, documented across multiple species, animals with fearlessness profiles, reduced threat sensitivity, diminished social feedback processing, present, measurable, heritable. Animals exhibiting persistent, targeted manipulation of conspecifics without social adaptive payoff, observed in our closest relatives. Animals engaging in extended, apparently pleasure-driven harm of other animals beyond any nutritional or territorial purpose, witnessed in some of the most cognitively sophisticated species on Earth. The behavioral and neurological ingredients of what we call psychopathy in humans are present throughout the animal kingdom, distributed across species and across individuals within species in exactly the patterns that evolutionary theory would predict. What animals almost certainly lack is the human layer of explicit moral awareness that makes psychopathy in humans something more than a behavioral profile. A human psychopath knows on some level that the social rules they violate are rules. They understand cognitively, if not emotionally, that what they are doing is considered wrong by the community around them, and they choose to do it anyway, or find themselves unable to stop themselves despite understanding the framework they are operating outside of. That metacognitive layer, the awareness of moral norms as norms, the understanding of right and wrong as categories that apply to one's own behavior, is what makes human psychopathy distinctively human. A dolphin tossing a porpoise is not choosing to violate a social norm. There is no norm it is aware of being violated. It is simply doing what its neurology makes rewarding, unconstrained by the empathic feedback that would make the activity aversive for most other dolphins. Is that psychopathy? Or is it something that occupies the same neurological and behavioral space as psychopathy without the cognitive architecture that gives the human version its particular moral weight? The honest answer is that the question is sitting right at the edge of what current science can resolve. The behavioral parallels are real. The neurological parallels are real. The evolutionary logic connecting them is real. What remains genuinely contested is whether the cognitive experience, the inner life, if any, of the animal engaging in these behaviors is similar enough to human psychopathy to warrant the same label. What is almost certainly true and worth sitting with is that the empathy spectrum is real, heritable, and present across the animal kingdom. The idea that empathy is simply on or off, present or absent, normal or broken. That binary model is inadequate for describing what we actually observe in either humans or animals. What exists is a continuous distribution, from individuals with intense, almost overwhelming empathic responsiveness at one end, through the normal range in the middle, to individuals with profoundly muted empathic responding at the other end. In social animals, humans, chimps, rats, dolphins, orcas, elephants, individuals across that entire spectrum exist within the same populations. They interact, compete, cooperate, manipulate, and support each other in the complex, dynamic, perpetually negotiated social worlds that make group living both extraordinarily productive and extraordinarily complicated. The individuals at the low end of that distribution are not anomalies to be explained away. They are, in their own uncomfortable way, part of the design. Part of what makes social groups adaptable, competitive, and capable of surviving the full range of environmental challenges that press on them across evolutionary time. Understanding that, not as excuse, not as absolution, but as biological reality, changes how we think about both the animals exhibiting these behaviors and the humans we apply the same label to. Psychopathy didn't come from nowhere. It didn't appear as a random malfunction in an otherwise uniform system. It is a variation on a theme as old as social life itself, present wherever brains capable of empathy exist, maintained by the same evolutionary forces that shaped everything else about the animal mind. The dolphin off the coast of Scotland, playing with the animal it is killing, is not a monster by any framework its own biology recognizes. It is doing what its particular neurology makes rewarding, unconstrained by the empathic brakes that slow down most other dolphins. Whether that makes it a psychopath depends on definitions we are still, as a species, working out. What it unambiguously makes it is something worth paying very close attention to. Because in that dolphin's behavior, reflected back at us from across the gulf of species difference, is something uncomfortably recognizable. Something that tells us that the darkest corners of the human mind are not uniquely human at all. They are old, older than our species, woven into the fabric of what it means to have a social brain in a competitive world. And that somehow is both deeply unsettling and oddly, strangely reassuring, because it means we are not alone in wrestling with this. The entire animal kingdom has been running this particular experiment for far longer than we have. We are just the first ones to notice, to name it, and to ask what it means.